Boy, y'all got quiet in a hurry. Holy cow, what was that? What was that? So again, Steve, thank you. That was great last night. And the thing I've told him a couple of times, it was such an encouragement rather than a beat down. I mean, everything was just so uplifting. And so thank you for putting that together and making that happen. That was a world-class effort on making that happen. I'm going to start taking a few minutes before every service and talk about who we are and where we're headed as a church and why we're even here in the first place. God made it possible for us to buy 2 tracts of land that became one. It was 22 acres, now it's 20 because the state took some frontage for this road work out here. So we were able to pay cash for that property. And last year we paid this building off, so we are debt-free. Having said that, we've got over $700,000 in the bank in addition to our general fund that's been given to get the other part of this building built. We're going to break ground probably in September and hope to be in the building, the new part of this building, by Easter. And so that is actually, it's not this might happen, this is going to happen. And yeah, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. Everybody plays a part in this. Everybody has a responsibility to contribute. Everybody has a responsibility to be involved in a ministry. Why does God have us here in the first place? He didn't make all this possible for no good reason so that we could just be another church on the road. They're building subdivisions faster than we can build churches on the road. There are plenty of people around here who don't know Christ. Over 80% of the people in this area are unchurched. And so we know that. We got to take it serious. Here's what I know, that as a person becomes a Christian and the older they get as a Christian, if I were to draw a pyramid on a chart right here, when we're new Christians, we have a lot of friends at the bottom of the pyramid. The longer we walk our Christian walk and the older we get, the fewer and fewer friends we tend to have who are lost. And that's the truth. True, right? You understand what I'm saying? And we naturally like to gravitate and be around people that we're comfortable with who have our same value system and same hairdo and the whole thing. And so we get to the top of the pyramid and we got no friends. No, we got nothing. And so the church cannot be that way. We have to constantly look for ways to engage, make some new friends, all right? If you don't have many, make some new ones. Go find somebody that's totally opposite of you and befriend them. Take on a challenge that way. God put us here to reach people who don't know him. Do I hear an amen on that? We don't have anywhere to put anybody right now. Now, I know you're saying, well, gosh, the room's half full right now, maybe. Well, it's raining, it's summertime. We get a little bit of a pass on that, but not much of a pass. People need to be here. And in every other healthy church, the place should be full right now. There's really no excuse. But we knew when we moved into this building, we were out of room from day one. This entire building was built for children. The other half of what you see up here, which is going to go on the other part of this wall in that grassy area, is the larger part of the church. So we've been struggling, kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul for space. Adults try to meet, children try to meet, students try to meet, and we're juggling chairs and rooms and in the foyer. And let me remind parents that we have a sense of urgency right now to find a student intern. And what that is going to turn into is male and female student interns and student ministers at this church as we grow, so that we have a way to reach the young ladies and the young men. But we've got a whole host of kids coming up from the 5th grade, and we've got to be ready for that. And we've been beating the bushes, just so you know, put that on your prayer list. That is urgent to me. And Jared and I both have been, and Steve's even been a part of trying to connect us with viable candidates for that position. But we're here to make a difference. We've been in a sermon series entitled Legacy, and legacy is what you leave behind when you're gone. How many people have looked back on your life? I'm about to be 64, and you go, what just happened? How did that happen? Where did all those years go? Anybody there? We're not going to be here forever, not on this earth, in this body, unless Jesus comes back right now. I mean, we're going to die. We're going to breathe our last breath. And so what's your legacy going to be? What difference are you going to make in the world in which you live? What difference are you going to make in this community? God has put this church here to make an eternal difference in the lives of people. And I'm not trying to be hard on anybody. I want this to be encouraging like last night was. But if you view this place as your nice, comfortable little place, gong. there's going to be a big hook come and just yank you right off the stage. That is not why you're here. That is not why this church exists, so it can be your comfortable little place. There are signs that I had posted by the front doors on the very first day we moved in here. Have any of y'all read those signs recently? Anybody know have anybody even seen the signs? They've been there so long. What does it say? You are now entering the mission field every time you walk out the front door. And we all have circles of influence wherever we go, day in and day out, where there's some lost people. And we need to be constantly poised and thinking about, how do I connect with this person? How do I create an open door and an easy way to communicate here and get a chance to share the gospel and let them see what Christ looks like in a real person, in a real normal person. Y'all with me? That's why we're doing this. That's the only reason that we're doing this, is to have somewhere to put people, especially children and youth, students, as we start really growing in that area. We're just struggling for space right now. We got none. So I'm going to be talking about this every week, and I want to encourage you with this. Next week, we'll have a picture of the floor plan up here so you can see what it looks like as you're going to be walking around inside that building. Everybody has to participate financially. The problem is it's all of us, not all of us, but we're buying stuff we can't afford with money we don't have, and so we're carrying around all this debt. And so folks are struggling, but I'm going to challenge you to figure out how to undo that and how to have some margin, create some margin financially so that you can give. There's a thing that's biblical called tithing, and it's given a 10th part of the whole. That's what the word means. And people say, oh, that's legalistic, that's in the law. No, it's way before the law in the Old Testament. It happened way hundreds of years before Moses ever wrote down the law. And, well, he actually watched it be written, but before that ever happened on Mount Sinai. And so tithing is a thing that's all about worship, and it's about who's the most important person in the room. It's not me, it's not you, it's the Lord. And it's a way to say that, like tangibly. And so if we had people who would do that in not just this church, but every church, we wouldn't even have to really talk about money. We would not have to have building campaigns and that kind of thing. God's got plenty, and He's entrusted us with it. What are we doing with it? So every Sunday now, how many of y'all are not going to come back now that I've just told you what I'm going to do at the beginning of every service? Yeah. This is exciting. And the possibility exists that we could move into this thing with, guess how much debt? Or close to it. It's about a $2 million nut, okay? We think, based on our original planning. So give me some grace there. It might be a tad more, a tad less. So this is going to happen. And I want you guys to be part of it, all right? And God put us here on purpose. So I'm going to shift into a sermon here, and I've got like 25 minutes to do this, all right? Y'all don't believe I can do it, do you? All right, ready? Let's talk about a lady named Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. And ask the question, what was her legacy? What did she leave behind? And remember, this is not a character study, this series is not. It's a treasure hunt. We're looking for that one thing. What's that one thing about this person that made them who they were and they left behind? And that one thing caused them to make a difference in their lifetime. We're looking for that one nugget. So in 1 Samuel chapter 25 in your Old Testament, it says, then Samuel died. He was really who everybody looked to in Israel at that point in time. And all Israel gathered together and mourned for him, buried him in his house in Ramah. And David arose, who was his protege, and looked up to him and went down to the wilderness of Paran, which is way south of the Dead Sea. You talk about some rugged territory. And that's where he went, and he had about 600 men with him. So we'll find that out. Now, there was a man in Mahon, who's down in that area, whose business was in Carmel, not California, but in the desert, in a really harsh, terrible place to live in. And the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel, and there's a little parenthesis here, literally, in your Bible. Now, the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance. But the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. Let's take a pause and talk about this story. Let's just walk through it. There are three main characters in this story. Well, three main and one unnamed. You got Abigail, you got her husband Nabal, you got David, and then you got Abigail's father, who's not named, but he's a part of this story, and you'll see in just a minute why. Abigail's name means my father is joy, which you can also interpret, my father finds joy in me. What is joy? We hear that word a lot. We use it a lot. Joy is not, I'll tell you what it's not, a feeling. It's not euphoria. Joy is not a dopamine hit. Joy is not happiness. Joy does not depend on a favorable circumstance in order to exist in your life. Circumstance is irrelevant when you talk about joy. Joy is the abiding presence of God in your life. That's what joy is. And that's what her name meant, Abigail. I have the abiding presence of God in my life. For a follower of Christ, if you're a Christian, joy is the life of Christ in you in the midst of any kind of circumstance, good or bad, terrible, great, don't matter. Circumstance is irrelevant. Whatever you're dealing with, wherever you're going, you have the abiding presence of God in your life. That is what joy is. So what was Abigail's legacy? Her legacy was joy. And I want you to understand something about her. Part of her legacy was that she was in an abusive relationship. Let's read some more here. So the man's name was Nabal. His wife's name was Abigail. David, in verse 4, heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, greet him in my name, and thus you shall say, have a long life, peace to you and peace be to your house, and peace be to all you have. Now I've heard that you have shearers, and now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have we missed anything all the days that they were in Carmel. So David's men are saying, we were with y'all, basically protecting y'all. And you didn't get anything stolen. We didn't do anything to you. You had us there to watch over you. So they said, ask your young men. They'll tell you in verse 8. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we've come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all the words David gave them, and they greeted him in David's name, it says. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Why is he saying that? Well, word got around about David, and everybody knew who David was because he killed Goliath. And some people understood, and how they knew, I don't exactly know, but that he was going to be the next king. They knew that, some people. Abigail knew that. And some people knew that David was running from Saul. Word spread. People talk. And so that's what Nabal is getting at here, a servant breaking away from his master. So he said, shall I then take my bread, my water, and my meat that I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? So David's young men retraced their way back and went back to David. They came and told him according to all these words. And just stop right there. We'll pick the story up in a minute. Nabal's name means fool. It's the same word that's used in Proverbs throughout that whole book to talk about people who are rude, ignorant, dishonest, belligerent, obstinate, stupid people. And I didn't come up with that. That's a quote from a scholar that's like not even alive now. But that's what Nabal was like. And she was married to him. Abigail was married to a fool. And she was in an abusive relationship. I can only imagine the verbal insults and the emotional beating she took from a guy named Fool. You can safely assume that based on the way he treated David's men. And the way that whole deal worked back then is David's men were protecting a territory. His flocks were in that territory, Nabal's were. David's men made sure that nothing happened to those animals or his people. And it's just like working in a restaurant where you just work your head off to be a great server and provide great service for a party at a table, and then what do they do at the end of the meal after they pay the bill, or they include it in the bill? They tip you, right? My daughter did that for a while in college, and you know who she said the worst people were when it came to tipping? Church people, without question. She said she had days where they would leave that much tip. Church people, after church on a Sunday. And so that's all they were asking for. We've taken care of you. We've protected you. If you got something left over, we'd appreciate you thinking about us. And you see how he treated them with just total disregard. And I'll guarantee you he treated his household like that too. And I guarantee you Abigail was treated like that. Marriages in the Old Testament were not based on love. They were business arrangements. Y'all probably know that. Fathers arranged marriages between daughters and sons to further the fortunes of their family so that in some cases they could just make sure they had food to eat. So they tried to put those families together that way. Abigail's father set her up with a loser. And I don't think he did that on purpose. He didn't know what he didn't know. He missed something about Nabal's lack of character. I absolutely do not think he did that on purpose, because this Nabal fella, he turned out to be a dud, and really worse than a dud. He was a dangerous loser, but he knew how to make money. That was one thing that he did right. One of the things we need to learn from Abigail as we track through this story in the next few minutes is this. When communicating, the goal is to be heard, not to prove that you're right and the other person is wrong. As we see her communicate, that was her approach. Let's read some more here. Verse 13, David said to each of his men, each of you gird his sword. Each man girded his sword. David also girded on his sword. About 400 men went up behind him, while 200 stayed with the baggage at their camp. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, he said, behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us. They were not insulted. We were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the fields. They were a wall to us both by day and by night, and all the time we were with them tending the sheep, you could put we were safe. Now therefore know and consider what you should do, Abigail, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man, Nabal, no one can speak to him. His servants talking about him that way. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared, 5 measures of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, go on before me, behold, I'm coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. It came about that as she was riding on her donkey, coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. Not scared one bit. Now David had said, surely in vain I've guarded all this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he's returned to me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more so, if by morning I leave as much as one male or anything that belongs to him. David was pretty ticked. Does it sound that way to you? She fell at his feet. Abigail fell at David's feet. Get what she says here. You talk about taking one for the team. She said, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame. And please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man, Nabal, for as his name is, so he is. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Meaning, if I'd have seen that, I would have taken care of it. Now, therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you. See what she did? The Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. Now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord, you, David, are fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you in all your days. You see how she approached him? She wanted to be heard. She's not trying to prove somebody's right and somebody's wrong. That never entered into the conversation. I'm going to talk about 4 things that happen when we live with joy at the very end of the message. And you'll see what happened to David because of the way she talked to him. While she was doing this, excuse me while I take a swig, she was letting God be God. And like Abigail, we should be doing what she did and do good to other people and at the same time let God be God. That comes from joy. She was mindful of not putting him on the defensive with words or tone. When we can get to a place in our life where we don't put people on the defensive, we create this atmosphere for redeeming experiences to take place. And there can be pivotal decisions made in a person's life that change the direction of their life. Jared, can I borrow you for a minute? I showed this to somebody. Come over here so I don't knock that thing off. I showed this to somebody a while back, and it has to do with this. It has to do with being jolted with words and being put on the defensive. I said, what you're dealing with all the time is like that. And they went, I said, yeah, like that, right there. I said, what does that do to you? I'm back on my heels. I feel like I'm going to fall over. And I said, well, you take enough of those kind of jolts, you can't even think straight, and you can be manipulated. You see that, right? And that's the way Nabal treated people. Thank you. Man, your arm's getting big, dude. And so she did not treat David that way. She approached him with a totally different demeanor. When we deal with people and not put them back on their heels, we create these times where the rest of their life could change and they will never be the same because they make the best decision in a pivotal moment. That's what she did for David right here. Let's keep reading this. Verse 29. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life then, she's talking to David, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in a bundle of the living with the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he'll sling out as from a hollow of a sling. And when the Lord does for my Lord according to all the good he has spoken according to you and concerning you, and he appoints you ruler over Israel. I don't know how she knew that, but she did. That he was a king in waiting. This will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord when you become king, both by having shed blood without cause and by my Lord having avenged himself. She saved David from doing that and having that stain, that mark on him when he became king. It would have damaged his trust level with people. And she saved him from that. Abigail did this for David. She created this pivotal moment where he could flourish and fulfill what God had called him to do and accomplish his purpose. As I said, David is the one who killed Goliath. He's the one who, at this moment in his life, was running from King Saul. Saul had rebelled against God and lost the throne, basically, and spent over a decade trying to hunt David down. Couldn't find him because David was in places like this that were too hard to get to. David is called a man after God's own heart because what touched God's heart also touched David's heart. And I'll tell you what was happening to David while he was doing this for over a decade. God was shaping him to be a king. He wasn't ready to be king yet, obviously. God used experiences like this to get him ready to sit on a throne and have a level head. His passion outran him still. That was his deal. He couldn't control the passion that was within him. Very passionate individual. And he'd accumulated a bunch of men during this decade, 600 of them that we know of, and they were all unhappy campers. They were literally rebels without a cause, and he turned them into a fighting force that followed direction. Abigail demonstrates for us how to communicate in tough situations without firing verbal missiles, but instead offering others these timely open doors to move through to the next place that God has for them and accomplish his purpose. And you know where that comes from? Joy, the abiding presence of God in her life. And she was in an abusive relationship at home. Y'all see that, right? But this is the way she conducted herself. This is her legacy. This is the thing that outlives her. Abigail brought the abiding presence of God with her everywhere she went. She was industrious and ingenious as she was beautiful, and she married a guy named Fool. She lived an awful existence under his emotional abuse, but you would have never known it by the way she conducted herself and the way she dealt with David. The key to her life was joy, which is the Lord's abiding presence in your life. That can and should be your legacy and mine. Circumstance is irrelevant to joy. Well, this third character we're going to talk about, we already know about him, Nabal. He's a descendant of the great Caleb, the Caleb of the wilderness wanderings. Joshua and Caleb, two of the spies who came back and said, let's do this thing. Let's go. We got this. But everybody else was scared to death. And so Caleb, along with Joshua, had to spend the next 40 years of their life wandering around in the wilderness with people who didn't know how to obey God, didn't know how to take a chance in faith. But when he finally got to go to the promised land, he was 80 years old. And he said, I'm as strong at 80 as I was when I was 45, or 85 as I was when I was 40. He was 85 when he went into the promised land. He said, I'm as strong at age 85 as I was when I was 40 years old. And they got to pick the territory that they wanted, and he pointed to a place that was infested with the enemy. He said, I want that right there. I'm going to conquer that territory. And by God, he did. And Nabal is descended from that Caleb. And Nabal tried to leverage that all the time, which is what he did with David's men here. He said, who's David? On purpose, he was very insulting to David and his men, on purpose. He basically told David and his men, you're nobody. You come from nothing. You have no pedigree, and you want to come and ask me, somebody as important as I am, for some of my money and some of my food? I come from Caleb. Are you kidding me? There's no way I'm going to do that. You're not a producer. You're not living a productive life. Who are you? Y'all are just a bunch of vagabonds. You're an underachiever. I'm not going to give you anything. That's how he spoke to them, basically. He scorned them. Now, people would say of Nabal, we learn this, they'd be around him and they go, you know that dude's a fool, right? That's what they would do all the time. That dude's an idiot. He's a fool. Stay away from him. That was his reputation, even in his own household. I read this week. Nabal was bigoted, stubborn, rigid, prejudiced, underhanded in his business dealings. He was stingy and tight-fisted with his resources. Aside from all that, I suppose you could say Nabal was a fine gentleman, right? Does that sound familiar in our day and time? I mean, we got a lot of people around that are like that. But they garner support because they are rich. And they have the right circle of friends. So Abigail was subjected to all that again, but you would have never known it because she lived with joy. Let me say this again. She had the abiding presence of God in her life. She brought joy to every situation that she walked into, in spite of her circumstance. Y'all see that, right? Young people in here, let me give you a heads up. Stop waiting on circumstance to be perfect. Guess what? It will never be. Live your life with joy. Live your life with the abiding presence of God no matter what you got to deal with, no matter what you walk into, no matter what's slung onto you, and it's not your fault. Start living with the abiding presence of God in your life. Let me tell you how to do that. First, you got to come to know Christ. Personally, you've got to ask for the gift that he's offering you. He says, look, I want to forgive your sin and give you eternal life. Will you let me do that? You got to say, yes, I want that. I agree with you. I sin. I missed the mark. I'm not perfect. I've been way less than perfect. I need you to blot that out. Take that. I owe you a debt for that. I can't pay that debt. Blot that out. That's what he did on the cross. And give me eternal life. God made you for life, not death. And somehow Abigail had a sense of that. Even in the midst of an abusive, terrible relationship, she let God be God. And here's what she did. She expected him to engineer her circumstance. You find it odd that she said to David, when the Lord is kind to you and he blesses you, remember your maidservant. If you read the story, she went to tell Nabal what happened. Nabal was drunk as a skunk. He was having a big party at his place, their place. He was out of his mind drunk, so she didn't say anything. The next day when he sobered up a little bit, she told him what happened and who he had insulted. And it says that fear struck his heart, and 10 days later he died. It says it right there. You can read it. Now, I'm not saying God's going to strike people dead that you have some you're at odds with. Don't misunderstand what we're talking about here. But I'll tell you what is true. God did something unusual. He did something unconventional. And he rescued Abigail. You see that in the story. And that's his decision, not mine or yours. He did what he wanted to do. And I think Abigail had some kind of sense that something was coming in her favor. She just did. This is going to be real quick, and I want you to write these down. You're not going to see them behind me. But when you're like Abigail and I'm like Abigail and we walk into any circumstance with joy, here's the first thing that happens. We remind people of their true identity. She basically said to David, be the king that you are. Don't go slaughter everybody. That's not who you are. Especially parents, you be real careful with you are statements to your kids. As adults, let's be careful with you are statements to each other. If you're going to say you are, say, you're made in the image of Christ. Say, you are a very gifted person. Say those kind of you are things. That's basically what Abigail said to David. You're a king. Act like it. Here's the second thing that'll happen. God's greater plan stands behind the door of obedience. Sometimes we think we're shut out from what he wants for us. We're not. We just got to wait on his door to open in his time. And it's going to open when we obey. Some of us have been standing at a closed door and we won't do a thing God tells us to do. And we wonder why times are tough and things don't work out. That's why right there. Because we're not doing what he tells us to do on the most basic levels. When we do, that door of opportunity, that door is going to open for us where we get to walk into his greater plan. Here's the third thing that's going to happen when we bring joy to the table. We give God room to do the unusual, which is what he did for Abigail. We don't know his mind. He says, my ways are higher than your ways. Does he not say that through the prophet Isaiah? He said, you're not going to figure me out all the time. So let's give him room to do the unusual and to move us along the path that he has for us in our life. Here's the fourth and last thing. Timing and tact will lead to hearing and heeding. That's what Abigail did to David. She dropped a bomb on him of tact, of right timing. And I can only imagine her demeanor and her facial expression. It said she bowed down before him. She was humble. She was not pitiful. She was just humble. And her timing and her tact, which has to do with tone of voice and body language, led him to hear and to heed what she was saying and what God was saying to him through her. So let me encourage us. If you don't already, live out of joy. Let's pray. Joy is the abiding presence of God in your life. The only other option we have to that is what the Bible calls flesh. That's living life on your terms and expecting God to show up and help you. Doesn't work that way. We, of all people on planet Earth, should be people of joy. We should understand what joy really is, and it just oozes out of our pores. So, Lord, help us to be people of joy, regardless of our circumstance. And thank you that this is possible for every one of us. It's not something for a special few. Abigail sets the tone for all of us with this. And I pray that in that way, we'd all be Abigails. We'd all be like Abigail and live out of your abiding presence, which is joy. And I lift this prayer in your name. Amen.